Josh Holder,
Saul Agnon,
Marcus Boykin,
El Navajas, and the Mexican Sicarios, Steve Horn, Commander Cox, Admiral Pillar, Captain Howard. All right, guys, today we will cover the final two episodes, 7 and 8, in the Terminal List TV show on Amazon Prime. And to join us is a special guest and friend of the podcast. Welcome, Eric Bishop.
I appreciate you having me on. Thank you, Mike.
Of course. And before we get started, I'm glad you're here to take an author's perspective as an author with one hit debut book, The Body Man, and you even have a second one coming out pretty soon. Is that right?
Breach of Trust, I'm supposed to deliver it to the publisher this month, and we don't have a release date yet, so I would assume probably 2023 at this point, but hopefully not too deep into 2023. So I should know that in hopefully another month or so, I'll know the release date.
Fantastic. Well, before we get started, just tell the folks a little bit about The Body Man, because I loved it. Crazy good book, and a lot of similarities here between what Jack Carr is doing with James Reece. You definitely do with The Body Man.
Well, I would definitely love some similarities to be, an Amazon Prime series. That sure would be a cool, that'd be a cool similarity to have. But baby steps. No, like we talked about back in the fall, first book released, but actually my fourth book completed. What I try to always tell people is, it's a marathon, not a race. So The Body Man really was a culmination of me kind of learning how to write. Those first three books were kind of my internship in a way, my apprenticeship. And, finally The Body Man hit and follows a Secret Service agent or someone who used to be a Secret Service agent. His job now is to protect the actual office of the presidency. When he goes missing, a whole lot of people want to know why and who he is and what information does he have. And FBI is involved. It would make a good Prime series if anyone's listening. So
great book.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the support you guys have given me. It means a lot.
Sure. So I've asked this to all of our guests so far who came on to review episodes of The Terminal List. Let's take a step back. What did it feel like when you were first able to click play, sit down, and watch James Reece come to life on the big screen?
I was pretty excited. So it was a mix of excitement, and also I knew we were going to be talking about this, so I knew I only had about 7 days. I also happened to exchange weeks with my kids in the summer, so it was actually starting. Friday was going to be my first day with the kids for a week, and so I was really wondering how in the world am I going to binge watch this series and talk to you guys. Fortunately, Amazon dropped it a day early. They dropped it Thursday evening.
That's right.
So once I got done with my other responsibilities, I hit play. I was very excited to hit play. And I finished episode 5 about 3 a.m. Then I had to go to sleep for a little bit so I could do my 9-to-5 job Friday morning. I watched 2 more episodes while the kids were here after they went to bed Friday night. So that was another 2 o'clock night. And then I saved episode 8 for, I think it was Sunday or Monday night. I don't remember now. But yeah, it was a really cool experience, especially because this has been in the works for so long. I remember just even conversations with Jack talking about this and how it happened, how he, how it came to fruition for him to have the series made. So definitely a lot of anticipation, and obviously we'll get into my thoughts on it. But I was super excited to hit play and loved the way it started. Of course, it started a little different from the book, starting in Syria versus Afghanistan. But again, the way I look at that real quick is that, the book is one thing. A visual representation is a completely another thing at times. The feel of it, even though it was different, it wasn't in, caves in Afghanistan. It was happening in the sewers in Syria under a building or a compound or whatever. It had that raw feeling. And, the way those guys were going through the tunnels and the tripwire and everything going on. I mean, it was pretty, that tension was palpable those first 15, 20 minutes of the series. So very well done.
Well, thanks for making the sacrifice to binge it so quickly so you could join us. I had a similar bingeable story. We were headed to the beach. We were going down to Myrtle Beach. And we get to the beach house, and I'm like, perfect. Every night, watch 2 or 3 episodes. We'll get this thing done in just a couple of days.
Yep.
And then there's no TV. Well, the beach house had a really small, old, beat-up TV, and I was like, no way. No way. So I went out the first night I got there right away and picked up a 55-inch that is now donated to the beach house just because I wanted to be able to see the show.
There.
Dude, I was not going to settle for a small, junky. It was a really dark screen. I was like, I want a big, nice screen for this experience. So I took the hit and made it happen.
I'm thinking Carr or Pratt could probably donate back that investment. They could probably Venmo you some a few shekels.
Or maybe Jeff Bezos, just out of the Amazon pocket.
I think Jeff most certainly could buy you that beach house and everyone next to it all the way down the beach and never even see that money was gone.
Let me text him. Just give me a second. Just gonna hit
absolutely.
Okay.
If you can remind him that he hasn't answered back about the Body Man 2 while you're at it, I'd appreciate it. So.
All right, well, let's jump into it. Let's get to episode 7. It's called Extinction. And to me, this episode represents the best storytelling of the whole series. I think narratively and thematically speaking, it advances the plot so well. It's closing a lot of loops. And while it's doing that, it's also building towards a crescendo of a final action set piece. I feel like it was just a gripping episode that had no inconsistencies, that take you out of the action wondering, wait, what, why, who? Instead, you were just bought in from the get-go. And while it's doing that, it's also really digging into Reece, the person, and the psychological effects of everything he's been through. It has that really massive flashback scene that we're going to have to get to, where he's stumbling throughout the house and sees Lauren and Lucy, and all these memories come flooding back. So how do you feel about that? It really opens at the Reece house.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I think, again, I view it, and as we talked about off camera too, I do not remember all the specifics from the book because it's been 4 years. I think I read it in July of 2018, if I recall. July of 2018 is when I read it. I read it actually the week after I met Jack in New York. And I spent some time with him in New York and got him to sign my book and everything. So that was super cool. And I came home and I had not read it yet. So I read it, and I read it in, I know it was less than a week. I don't remember how many days it was, but I read it over several nights after work. So that's actually a blessing in a way, that some of the specific details of the book kind of got lost to time, just to my writing projects, all the other books I've read. So I do view it as its own entity. And definitely, episode 7 and all the stuff that takes place in the house, it really gets into Reece's head. And you see how tormented he is, in a way, which you would expect he would be after what happened with his family. I know the one thing that I thought was just brilliant on whoever in the writing team or Antoine, whoever came up with the idea of the bird going into the window, and to keep going back to that, and to his daughter to keep asking, is she going to be okay? Is the bird going to be okay? There was a lot deeper meaning there to that. So the layers to it, I thought, were quite good.
Yeah, that really was an artistic, creative addition that only works visually, right? That's not a scene you can have reoccurring throughout a book before it gets really stale. But visually, they could tinker with it each time they're looking at the dead bird, or each time she asks the question. It represents a different dynamic the family's going through, with Reece on deployment. Is he the injured bird? His mental health issues that he's going through right now. So yeah, really creative choice that can only be done through visual storytelling. And I like that motif has a big payoff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, that visual thing, and I think people do sometimes get hung up on the book versus the adaptation. And I will say I'm a hypocrite with what I'll say next, because I definitely got hooked, or I got caught up into that when I watched Without Remorse last year.
Right.
That was one of my favorite Clancy books. And so I tried to have an open mind, and I sat down and watched Without Remorse, and
it was
could
rough.
not stand it. Could not
It
stand
was
it.
rough. Yeah.
And I didn't even, and again, another story that I couldn't remember all the details, but my brain kept saying, wrong, wrong, wrong. My brain remembered, even if, or my subconscious remembered if my brain really wasn't connecting the dots. And so definitely after that experience with this one, I wanted to go in with a clean mind of going, okay, you kind of know how the sausage is made a little bit. So go in looking at this as an adaptation of a work and for a visual medium. And part of it too, I think, is the fact that Jack was involved.
Yes.
That I think set me at ease as a viewer and as a fan of his books, because, and I don't think people realize this, and maybe they do, but typically when Hollywood buys the rights to something, the first thing they do is cut the writer out.
Exactly.
They don't want the novelist, they don't want them on set saying, that's not what I wrote. That's not what I said. They don't want to hear them. And so the fact that Jack was able to have that opportunity to not only have his voice heard, but to actually be in the, I think it was all done via Zoom because of COVID, but to be in the writer's room, to be on the scripts, to be going over it. And then I think he was on set. I know he said it in one of the interviews that I saw how many times he was on set, but he ended up being on set for 5 of the weeks or 6 of the weeks or whatever it ended up being. I actually texted him one time when he was on set, and I think I had missed Pratt by a couple seconds, whatever. Oh, Chris is already gone, and I'm like, darn it, my claim to fame is over. So
can you just slip, the Body Man on his shelf in the garage with all the other books?
I mean, can't you just hand him a copy? What in the world, Jack? So no, I wouldn't. And I would never. But no, I think with him, having him on set, and just having a lot of SEALs on set, having drawn a blank. Jared Shaw. There we go. Sorry, trying to get real names versus Boozer.
Boozer
versus the name of the show. But having Jared on set and play a role too, which was really cool,
creates a lot of trust. It creates a team.
Absolutely. Well, it created a brotherhood.
Yeah, and a brotherhood. Yeah.
I watched a little bit. I think Jack also, his podcast is doing a breakdown of the episodes with Jared and with the showrunner David. And they briefly had brought up and I didn't catch much of it. I just caught a little piece. I'm very slow on watching podcasts most of the time or listening to them, but they were basically talking about the brotherhood and how so many SEALs were involved in this, that they had so many layers that could see about the authenticity.
Yeah.
And that comes through. That comes through in all the scenes. And again, I'm no military background myself, and most of my contacts and close friends actually are Army, not Navy. But I know from all the stuff I've watched, all the stuff I've read, all the stuff I've researched for my own books, this feels authentic. The scenes with the SEALs is authentic. I've been to Coronado. I've actually watched the SEALs running up and down the beach, carrying the logs in person when I was there years ago. It's those details that when they get right, people get drawn into the story better, versus a detail that's done wrong will pull you out of a story, whether it's the written part or the visual. And that part I think they got right for sure.
And that's a perfect transition, because I think one of the best decisions that was added to the show that wasn't in the book was including the Bud's visuals, carrying the log. I think it's one of the very opening scenes here.
Yes.
And ringing the bell, and they do show the bell, and it just really made it feel authentic. And then the Commander Cox storyline, I thought that was a really smart play.
Yeah.
That he was added to the list, because I think in the books he wasn't necessarily on the list.
Okay.
And then to mirror that with Reece's time in Buds and how Commander Cox was giving him the business. If you were half the SEAL your father was, and
yeah, exactly.
Man, that's going to come full circle when his name is added to the list. And I guess one last thing that makes me think of, Extinction is the show title. Reece is kind of having to grapple with the extinction of that brotherhood as he thought he knew it. Commander Cox knew his father. He was his Bud's instructor. And then the very end of episode 8, there's an extinction with the brotherhood. So what'd you think about adding the Bud scenes here and having Commander Cox's what'd you think about that kill? Because that kill was not in the book, how he got Commander Cox.
See, I didn't remember that wasn't in the book. All I know is watching that episode and watching him basically, tethered to that log, you could feel yourself like going under. You could feel like, man, that would be a crappy way to go. You're going to drown. I thought it was great. And again, especially since I've actually been on that beach before, I've watched what those guys go through in a very small couple, minutes. I was there just watching the guys run, and they were just running up and down the beach. They weren't in the water with the logs or anything. But no, I thought it was a very good, and it was a very powerful moment. And absolutely, like you said, with having the bell, and Jack's talked about that a lot over the years in his podcast. I think people that have not been through that, myself being one of them, you always immediately think of, man, you don't want people to ring the bell. But Jack always said, no, I want people to ring that bell because I want the people that are there with me, that are serving with me, I want to know they're able to do what's required of them and they won't quit. Because quitting typically won't just kill you, it'll kill the guy next to you.
Yeah.
It might kill the whole platoon. Yeah, I thought that was, I thought with Cox, and I think the Extinction, I made a few little notes here as I was watching the episode. I think the Extinction really could apply, and again, I don't know, but it could apply to not just Cox, but also Howard and Pillar. They did with Warcom, basically, the extinction of this hierarchy within Warcom.
And of honor, the extinction of dignity and honor and all the values of the Brotherhood, yeah.
Yeah, well, and just that scene, and I know that scene was a lot different that took place in Admiral's office, and I'm sure we'll get into more details of that, but the betrayal that takes place.
Yes.
And that's something, again, I only know it through hearing Jack's stories, reading books by other SEALs and other people that have served. I don't have that muscle memory of living through it or whatever, but I do know guys, I have friends that serve in 5th Group. One retired about a year and a half ago, I guess now. One of them's still in. I talked to him a couple of weeks ago on his birthday, actually. And I know just within them, within the group, within the Army, within 5th Group, it's a brotherhood. Those guys become, I've been at their houses. I've stayed with them. I see how they interact. They're as close as any brothers. And I'm sure even more so when you've got a really small group like these SEAL teams, and they train together obviously constantly, but they're on, they're the tip of the spear. The missions they're going on really are life or death, and really are situations where you have to be the best of the best to execute. And so when one of those people betrays you, or when the commanding officer, in the situation with the terminalists, when the commanding officers are the ones that are part of the betrayal, part of the knowledge of what they're doing to these guys and what they're giving to them, you can understand why someone like Reece essentially snaps and says, I'm going to burn it all down. Don't blame him.
Yeah.
Don't blame him at all.
Betrayal is such an important theme here that goes hand in hand with, well, I would say, the two best performances of this episode, and possibly the best performances of the last few episodes, I think go to the Admiral and Captain Howard. The way Captain Howard absolutely freaks out, and we talked about ringing the bell, the way he quits, he wants to get his family out, he's quivering, his family is freaked out by him, and then Ben shows up at the door. I just love that moment. And here's the deal, the Captain Howard kill in the book was actually what happened with his intestines getting cut out and pinned to a tree. So me and all the other readers are thinking, what's going to happen to Captain Howard? Because he was supposed to be killed with that method. I think it was a brilliant decision to make him the one who wears the vest. Because in the book, for anyone who doesn't know, Mike Tedesco wore the vest and went into the Admiral's office, who owned the company for RD 4895. Tedesco was often in and out of the Admiral's office. And that was explained away that, the Admiral was dealing with a lot of contractors, right? And so contractors were always in and out of his office. I don't think if you put that on screen, I think the second you see one of the guys on the business end of things actually at Warcom, it's done. It's just too clear cut that there's a conspiracy here. So I don't think you could have mixed the business guys of episode 3, 4, and 5 and had them in Warcom. So they kind of were separated visually. And because of that, it was super important that someone else had to wear the suicide vest. And when the decision was made to make that Captain Howard's kill. If anybody complains about that as being different than the book, they're completely wrong, because it made so much sense. And then Captain Howard's performance in that scene and the scenes with his family is just unbelievable and extraordinary. So I think switching those two kills, the drug cartel and Captain Howard, so they each got the other type of kill, I thought was a great decision that worked.
Yeah, and that was going to take me back to the scene, when they're on the beach, when they're in front of the vehicle with his wife and his son.
Haunting.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, in that instance, I didn't sympathize with Howard as much, but I saw from his perspective of, man, what do you do as a father? You've screwed up. You've done something or been a part of it, whether you had your hands in it, whether you were making the decisions or not, you had your hands in the cookie jar.
Right.
And having your hands in there resulted in the loss of a lot of lives. Now your family is possibly going to pay the consequences to what you did. And are you willing to then finally, at the very end, man up and make the decision to take the responsibility? And that was, as a dad, that was a hard scene just to watch, because you get why they're doing it and you get why Reece would do it, but also he's just about to cross, I don't know if he, would he have completed what he was starting to do or not, but he was getting ready to cross that line, enter, out of that gray area of, Howard was culpable, of course, but are his wife and kids, his wife and child culpable? No, just like Reece's wife and daughter
family.
were.
Exactly. He says that too. He said, I had a family once, when Captain Howard was trying to plead for his family's life. Reece was like, so did I.
Yeah, so did I. Absolutely. And that was a real powerful scene. Yeah. And I agree. Again, like we talked about earlier, I think you have to separate. And I had forgot it was Howard that actually, and I think that took place in the Everglades in the book, right?
Right. He took him out into like a swamp. I don't know where exactly, but a mangrove swamp. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I knew it was in some kind of a swampy environment. So that was, I don't remember what episode that was, maybe 5 or 6? Five?
Well, he does it to the drug lord, which must have been the Mexico episode 3 or 4.
3 or 4, okay.
But it also made sense to switch that, though, because El Navajas, the drug cartel leader, he was actually the one with the forearm wound, which means he's the one who killed Lauren and Lucy. So saving the most gruesome kill for him, I just thought was a really smart decision.
And I was wondering, I remembered how it happened in the book. I didn't remember the character it was in the book. I just remember the scene in the book. And my brain, I will say, did it back, I know, an episode we're not talking about, but back to that episode, my brain did like the book version better, only because of what he did with the entrails, of how he did that. I wondered, as it was coming up, I know Jack had hinted in some of the press releases on this of, you guys know what scene really made the book, and I want to let you know that that does occur. And so I was kind of wondering how that is going to happen.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad they worked it in. And I mean, it's one of those scenes that could become too graphic quickly. Exactly. And I think the way the book probably explained it probably would have been too graphic for viewers. It probably might have turned people off. But I don't know, in the book it worked really well, and it definitely worked good on the visual of what they did.
Yeah, I think we need to be satisfied that Amazon greenlit it, because in the book, he takes a few laps around that tree with his intestines strangling that tree tighter and tighter. And then I think Jack said that method of kill was used by a lot of indigenous groups in the Americas. I know the Incas for sure used it.
Yes.
And then also I think some North American indigenous groups. And it wasn't even the bleeding out part that killed you. It was while you were bleeding out next to this tree that you're tied to by your small intestine, the animals eat you as well. So there's even more torture. Amazon, at least you greenlit it, because no one should be watching that on screen, the whole thing.
I think sometimes we have this false idea that violence, especially in our culture with guns in the United States, with everything you see in the news, people have this assumption that, well, it was a little bit nicer back in the day, or there wasn't so many weapons, there wasn't this. It's like, no, it was more brutal back in the day. When you were quartered, and there was a lot of ways people were killed, and they weren't quick deaths always. A 50 cal bullet to the head you're turned off as soon as that lead pierces the flesh. You don't feel a thing at that point. You do when you're tied to a mangrove tree and the croc starts eating you or whatever starts nibbling on you. So, yeah, absolutely.
Though, you know what also sucks? Taking 1,400 ball bearings, to the chest. Because that's also gruesome when Reece is on the phone and Captain Howard's there quivering. And what does he say? 100 ball bearings for each of my friends?
Yes, per man that was killed. 100 per
seal
man.
that you murdered. Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, another one of those things they put in there that sticks with you, and that is a powerful moment. It evokes a lot of emotion. And it brings you into that scene, and it lets you see the reality of what befalls the admiral by the decisions he made. Really,
that scene is even elevated as I think about it in a couple of earlier cuts when Reece and Ben are preparing for that. You see Reece sewing the vest together, and you're kind of wondering what he's doing. The readers knew, of course, because we knew a suicide vest had to come, but he even tries it on himself.
Yes.
And that happens at the same time when I think he calls Katie at another scene and apologizes to her. I never meant for it to get this deep. And even asks Ben, right? Ben, you're going to get caught up in this. He apologizes to Ben. He says, I'm sorry I brought you into this. And Ben says, you didn't bring me into it. They brought me into it, which certainly ends up to be true. But all of this, and Reece just had that crazy flashback. I think we're led to believe that he's going to wear the vest. And Ben even says, are you sure you want to do this? And the whole time, if I hadn't read the book, I would be thinking, does Reece wear the vest? And that's how he goes and gets the admiral, the commander, and the captain. And then, man, when they take the family and he tells Captain Howard, if you do this one thing for me, the thing I asked you to, you'll save your family.
Yes.
And then cut scene, and he's walking into the admiral's office.
He's walking in,
that scene is kind of built up through 3 or 4 other interactions that come earlier in the episode. And that's another reason I say this one might be my favorite. And I think just narratively, it's the best episode for storytelling because of how things like that are done.
Well, and because the storytelling takes place because there's, in this scene especially, there's not wall-to-wall action. There's not, I don't know that episode 7 really has any gun battles or anything. I think it's, Warcom blowing up is a pretty good, finale to it, of course. But yeah, I think in that sense there is, I think you're right, that there's a lot more storytelling in this episode and a lot more into Reece's, what's going on with him psychologically. And again, another thing that I think the way they elicited what's happening to him in the flashbacks is a powerful, powerful way to do it.
Yeah. In that house, as he's contemplating what's about to come with killing Commander Cox and using the suicide vest, Lauren tells him that she's pregnant, which was also in the book. It wasn't just Lucy. It was their other unborn child.
Yes.
So they're picking out baby names together in the flashback. And then she cuts to yelling at him. How could you go on one more deployment? You said you were done 3 deployments ago, which I can only imagine is a very familiar conversation to our operators.
Yeah.
And she blames him. She says, you say you're doing this to protect us, but you're really, going on deployment for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lucy wins a spelling bee trophy. I just feel like all these flashbacks are just reminding Reece what he could have had and what he should have had. And because of that, he's more likely to follow through on the list and do whatever it takes. And that puts him in the mindset where he could take Captain Howard's family and hold them hostage.
That's a good way to look at it. Remind me too, because you seem to be remembering the book much better than I. In the book, is the list, was he using a crayon in the book to write it, or no?
Oh, and then at one point he uses blood, right, on the show? He crosses one name.
Yeah, in the show he uses blood. My brain was telling me that in the book he used a crayon. He used one of her crayons, and I just couldn't remember if that was my brain not remembering something or creating a situation.
No, I think you're right, because he gets a lot more of the names up front. One of the earlier interrogations, like Saul Agnon, sings like a bird and gives him 5 or 6 names all at once. So I think you're right. He does write the list down really more in one complete sit down, where in the show It's kind of like a video game. One guy leads to the next guy who gives you information for the next level, and then that brings you to the next boss, which totally worked here. But yeah, I think you're right about that.
Well, it builds drama too. So if again the visual, and like we've discussed, the visual medium I think has to be different from the book medium. And if the visual medium started with him early in the first episode, having a complete list, you've taken so much drama and so much suspense out of later episodes because you don't know who the bad guys are.
Right.
If it plays out that way. But if you have a list to start the show, every time those characters come up, be like, oh, well, he's going to kill them at some point. They're bad. Versus leaving it unto the own of going, oh, even earlier in the show with Secretary Hartley, is she good? Is she not? I mean, you can multiple episodes, you can kind of see either way, and wonder, and it's always that wonder of, is this person, going to be? Are they going to make the list, basically?
And building that suspense, I want to talk about Lorraine Hartley, which will definitely come, maybe episode 8 once we transition in a moment here. Can we trust her or not? Is she being truthful? That's up in the air for me. But one other way they build suspense is that while Reece is crossing off a few names of his list, Katie is still trying to do what she does best, which is get the scoop. Right. Unfortunately, she is taken in by the Fugitive Task Force and Tony Leun's team. But even while she's basically under arrest with the FBI, not able to leave this room, she's still asking questions. And she's still negotiating. And one thing she convinces Tony to do is that in your investigation, if you want to get to the bottom of this, why Reece is doing what he's doing, look at Steve Horn's computer. You're going to trace the money. You're going to see the financials. Tony buys it. The FBI does look into it. And that's what leads him to go to Warcom, knowing Reece is going to show up there because all these guys are linked, making millions off of the Nubellum sale. But one point of suspense is that last payment. Oberon Analytics, there's $20 million unaccounted for. Were you thinking it was Hartley? Did you think she was the final player profiting off this? Or did you have a hint at what was coming?
Yeah, definitely was where I was thinking. Just watching the episodes, absolutely. Thinking, okay, there's that, the big, there's the whale at the end. There's the one person the casino is watching out for. You got the whale coming in. Who's it going to be? And so I think because she was sprinkled throughout all the other episodes, well, she's got to factor in somehow. So is she factoring in as the white knight that helps save in the end, or is she been pulling strings all along and doing it for a nefarious purpose, for money, which you hate to be cynical, but at the end of the day, and we're not talking politics here clearly, but at the end of the day, there's enough stories out there that, I was telling my kids about it recently. We were just talking about politics and different stuff and payoffs and all how these people get into office and, their base salary is $160,000. And after, 5 terms in office, 10 years, they come out and they're worth $40 million. Well, okay. I know what I make a year and I'm not going to be making 40 million in my lifetime, even if I save every penny. So
yeah, it's unbelievable. And I think the book maybe, and a lot of thrillers play into the political side of things much more than the TV show did, and the corruption. Yes. I think here it was the command structure from Admiral Pillar down. It was also the business side of things. The show maybe skirted the politics, which is probably a good move because while it's more in the books that Lorraine Hartley and her husband, in fact, is in the book, are angling for a White House run. They're supposed to be shoo-ins for the next election. You see a lot more angling on the Hill. I'm kind of glad it didn't do that. I think right now we needed to be a little removed from politics in our entertainment. Yeah. And the story just didn't need that dimension because it had so much complexities as is. But maybe down the road, who knows if some of the later books, which definitely I think still continue to have a political aspect to them, that might be something they try to work in later.
Well, and I think in a way this was, the way they did this series, basically it was so respectful to the SEAL community.
Yes.
To the sacrifices they do. And I think they put so much of a focus on that versus, I hate to say it, but sullying it with politics.
The corruption of politics. Right.
Yeah. And talking back to what we were talking about before, especially when you have that community and you have some people within that community that do something that's going to damage it. And a lot of times, unfortunately, that happens, with higher ups. They're not the ones that are bleeding in the sand. They're not the ones having to, go through what these guys go through, the sacrifices. They're sitting in a compound that's Warcom should have been secure. Apparently it's not in episode 7, but they're sitting in this secure compound while their teams are out there, dying in other countries, and the families are this, the scenes earlier in the series when they're having the funerals, and and Reece is attending the funerals. That's the reality for these military families when there's a loss in the community. Not in any way to say the commanding officers don't feel that, but you are removed from it when,
Exactly.
When it's not your spouse, when it's not your, teammate that just isn't coming home, and, you're with them on every deployment, and you go out to the bars or go out and have dinner, together, and run into Taco Bell when you guys get back. They're not having any of those experiences. That's when you lose that guy next to you, that's much different from a commanding officer losing a person, 5 layers under them.
You're so right about the layers, because when you're at a desk in an office looking at paper most of the days, it's very different than looking at the guys around you, day in, day out.
Absolutely.
But one more thing that wraps up in episode 7 is that Pillar hands over the files to Tony Leung and the FBI. He says,
Right.
You want to know about the drug trials? Well, here you go. And guess what? They were authorized by the Pentagon. This
Right.
shit runs right up the flagpole.
Yep.
And the DCIS agent, Azad, who is kind of covering for Hartley, says this was not an illegal operation. Pillar had an emergency use authorization signed by the SecDef approving the experiment of trying RD-4895 on a SEAL platoon without their knowledge. So there was legal cover for everything Admiral Pillar did, except Hartley's going to say he tried to cover it up. I didn't know about the tumors. He never reported on the tumors. Everyone was so deep getting their pockets lined, they wanted to hide things.
Yep.
We're left in the dark whether Hartley knew that or not, but she's claiming to Katie, I authorized it because I care about our troops. I care about our special operators who are on these massive deployments. They're suffering in a lot of ways and making sacrifices, and this drug could help them. And so I did something drastic. I did something bold with the hope that this drug would help. And I wanted to jumpstart that and kickstart that as quickly as I could. So She maybe did the wrong thing, but she's trying to say for all the right reasons.
Yeah, well, and that's we've seen that just in our world in the last couple of years, just with what we've gone through with COVID and stuff. I mean, testing on major drugs, that's never happened so quickly before. And so that it makes people conspiratorial at times. And so if you've got someone saying, well, I was doing it for the right reasons. Well, it's great to be doing something for the right reasons, but what are the consequences of those actions? So if you're testing a drug on soldiers that's not fully vetted, it's not been through all the clinical trials, and then there ends up being consequences to that, and you go, well, our intentions were great. Well, tell that to all the dead people.
Exactly.
We didn't mean to kill you. We just, we're trying to save other soldiers. You don't get that. Yeah. And especially in the mind of James Reece, that you don't have a pass for that, which happens in episode 8. He decides that there's a consequence to what's been done.
You betcha. You're being added to the list.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I guess one person who's staying off that list for the time being is Tony, because he does, after the explosion go off, encounter Reece at his house.
At his house, yeah.
Tony sneaks in with a sinking suspicion that's where Reece detonated the bomb from.
Right.
And he confronts him. And, Reece gets to jump on him.
He got to see Reece's safe very up close and personal.
Oh, yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Yes, he did.
I'm sure Reece would have loved to use the contents of that safe on him, but he chose, and this was a decision Reece had to make, when Tony very convincingly says, I know what happened to you. I know how they killed your family. I have evidence that it was Horn and Pillar, and we have them, Reece. Let justice take it from here. And Reece's response, I am justice.
Yeah, that was a powerful line. Well, and also, I think it was a powerful line, but also the fact that he steps back from that moment. I know he knocks him out, obviously, and he can't just turn around and walk away. He's probably going to get shot or handcuffed or whatever. But I think that speaks to Reece's humanity. Because again, like I was talking about before, it's so easy for a character in any book or series, whatever, to do something for it's back to the drug. Well, we're doing something for the right reasons. So Reece is trying to, exact vengeance for what's been done to his brotherhood. But you can cross, if he had killed, Howard's son, would he have been any better than Howard? If you take an innocent life and, it is that gray area where these people have to operate, and there's such thing as collateral damage, and, a bullet could get fired and you miss the target and you hit someone innocent behind it. I don't know what that would even be like. I've never had to experience that in life, but that's a much different situation from then I'm just shooting that innocent person to get to someone else. Completely different dynamic there.
Tony didn't do anything. He's really doing his job. His job. There seems to be a crime. I'm investigating that crime. You are a suspect I need who is on the run, and I have to take you in. So
on the run, and there's bodies falling every time.
Right? Exactly.
So
how could you fault Tony for going as hard as he can to try to catch this guy? And Tony tells his team, our number one mission is prevent the loss of life.
Right, exactly.
So good guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of our earlier guests mentioned this, and if you haven't read the books in a while, might not be so easy to see. I wasn't sure I believed it at first, but Tyler, I got to thank Tyler, who came on with us for episodes 3 and 4. He made the connection between Tony and Freddie Strain. Freddie Strain was the one who was sent after Reece. His SEAL team was actually tasked with taking in Reece on domestic soil, and there were a lot of issues about activating a military platoon on domestic turf.
I do remember that from the book now that you bring it up, yes. Right.
But Reece lays a trap for them at this cabin in the woods. I think it's in New Hampshire. And Freddie is the guy who's like, I don't want to do this to him, but we got to take him. It's our orders. We're sworn to that oath. And Reece doesn't kill them, even though he set the trap. Tony, he could have killed Tony in the mountains. He didn't take the shot, though he had him lined up. Here, he could have killed Tony again, but he realizes he's just doing his job and wasn't implicated in the conspiracy in any way. And in fact, Freddie Strain becomes a really, really close friend of Reece in book 2. And most of what Reece is doing in the Blood, Jack's newest book, is based on events with Freddie Strain. So I think Tyler was right that Tony could be a replacement setting up for a Freddie Strain storyline in season 2 and beyond.
You'll remember better than me. So in the book, I do not believe there's an HRT team, right?
No, there's no FBI.
Because it's Freddie. It's a SEAL team that's really going after him. Okay.
Exactly.
Which I'd be curious to know why they decided to make that switch. And Jack will probably talk about it in one of his podcasts that he's breaking down each episode. But yeah, interesting.
It kind of helps you avoid the conundrum of, what's the Latin phrase for using military personnel as law enforcement domestically?
I don't know the phrase. I know it's not allowed, though.
Posse Comitatus, the Posse Comitatus Act. And so you kind of get out of that because that had to be explained away in the book of why Freddie Strain's troop was tasked with going after Reece on domestic soil. So again, probably a smart switch to make that the FBI and bringing in HRT as your special forces guys.
Well, the average person out there the average person that follows any kind of this type of book or whatever, these type of TV series, knows the FBI's job. I was fortunate. It's about 3 years ago now. I actually did the FBI Citizens Academy down in Greenville, South Carolina. It was a 10-week program. And it was, I had a deep respect for the FBI. I already finished The Body Man before I took the class. So I had researched the FBI a lot. I had known a few people that gave me some information. Mainly, I just researched as much as I could and made stuff up. But in taking that class, my respect for the FBI grew exponentially. Just seeing what, all the responsibilities and the stuff the stuff they had to go through. The hardest class was the one on trafficking, the internet. And I mean, they went into great detail with us about the stings and the operations that take place. And as a dad with 2 little kids and a young daughter, especially, man, you want to talk about a job that I don't know how you do it without, I hate to say it, without turning into a James Reece. I don't know how you could deal with that on a daily basis and seeing these creeps out there when what they do. And I researched it for a book that I've not finished or not really worked on yet, but one I was planning to. I looked into the trafficking, and because I'm in upstate South Carolina, Western North Carolina area, and in my research, I realized that Atlanta, and they talked about it some in the FBI class as well.
That's a big Atlanta, hub, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a huge hub for it. They move them in from South America there, and then Atlanta is where they spread them out. And it's just like you read about these stories, and the FBI confirms it when you work with them that it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But yeah, definitely bringing the FBI into it from a series standpoint totally for me made sense, and it fit appropriately. And HRT, I mean, they're badasses. I was supposed to go to Quantico because it got canceled because of COVID. Because of COVID, we had a trip scheduled for Quantico. I wasn't going to get to do anything cool, but we'd see Hogan's Alley and do a bunch of stuff. I need to actually check with my contact and see if maybe they'll do it this fall or if they've rescheduled it. Every year it just kept getting bumped. But I researched them pretty heavily in the course of the book because I have an HRT team in my story. And, they're operators. They're really, really good at what they do. But, unfortunately, they have to come across James Reece, who's just, he's a step ahead. And he's also lived it. This is a character that's operated in this type of terrain for years. And this is second nature to him, second nature to hunt and also to evade. So.
Right. The best novel in the thriller genre I've seen with HRT, the FBI Hostage Rescue Team, is Transfer of Power. Vince Flynn's first Mitch Rapp book. You got it back there?
It's actually I know we're not doing a visual, so no one else can see it.
We got the original, the first edition.
It is the original. It is not only the original. I have a signed original from Vince. Wow. Not from Vince. He didn't give it to me. I've never told really the story of how I got it. One day I might, but for now we'll just leave it as a mystery of how I got the signed copy. But that is my most treasured book I have.
Wow. Well, we'll have you back on Mitch Rapp Pod for your third No Limits appearance to talk about that one.
There we go. I'll be glad to do that. But yeah, no, absolutely. That not just because it's signed. That to me is my favorite book that Vince did.
What a book.
I did like Term Limits a lot. I will say that was my first one I ever read. Just because of what was happening, I did really like the storyline at that time in life. And and I mentioned it several years back when Jack was getting going. The Terminalist to me was the best debut since Vince came on and since Term Limits came out. Basically,
I think you're right.
The Terminalist was the next one that just drew it dragged me into the story really. And probably as a dad with little kids and all the things you can imagine could happen, you think, I can understand vengeance. I can understand retribution. I can understand if it happened to my family that to have that skill set to be able to take those people out. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think, and you're right about debut books. I kind of think Term Limits, published in 1997, Vince's debut book, he got rejections. I think something close to 60 rejection letters, sold it out of the back of his car, friends and family in St. Paul, Minnesota. He just pushed and grinded. It's a lot like you did to bring The Body Man to print. But I think the way Term Limits hit for your generation, the generation between mine and yours, I think is what Terminalist is going to do for a lot of younger readers in their 20s or teens even. I think it's the book that can bring an entire wave of people into the genre. And the same way you or I got hooked on Vince, at least as a teenager, I think a lot of people, especially young people, are going to get hooked on Jack Carr and James Reece. So I see a ton of overlap between Term Limits and Terminalist, which Jack had his copy of Term Limits on his first deployment. He remembered bringing it and reading it on the plane. So
he met Vince. I think he said he met Vince at SHOT Show in Vegas one time. And like he got to, I think if I remember correctly, he got to walk out of the center there with him. So he got to spend, and it's not a 1 minute walk that's in the middle of this huge convention center. So he got to actually spend and I think the funny part in the interview when he mentioned it was back before like cell phone days. So he didn't get a selfie with him. He didn't get a picture with Vince Flynn. And of course that was his only, I think the only time he ever met him. But that, kind of full circle. Then years later, it's your book that's, now, like you said, inspiring a generation. And obviously having it turn into a series, having Chris Pratt, who's, one of the more bankable and recognizable and just nice guy. I know there's been critics. I think, Rotten Tomatoes or whatever has dogged the series. I think I saw that there, but the fans have given it just, flying colors. And at the end of the day, who cares what the critics say? It's the ultimate, are your fans happy with what you've put out? And Chris draws a crowd, and he is, the way he played that role, he is James Reece. I mean, he embodied that role and he looks the part, he acts the part. And for someone that I don't believe served any military time, he's transformed himself visually and in character to be a member of the SEAL community, which is,
100%.
pretty darn cool.
The range that he shows from the first scene, he's got to do the flashbacks with Lauren and Lucy all happy. And then the way that that episode ends with him agonizing over her body on the kitchen floor. And then how the episode opens with him as an operator and a commander of his team. The range he shows in that one pilot episode is unreal. And yeah, he keeps it up throughout the series. I'm very glad, though, that you brought up the ratings on Rotten Tomatoes, because we have a segment on this podcast known as The Critics Can Go Scratch. And it would be remiss of me if I did not give the folks that segment my little quick rant here. Believe it or not, at the time of recording, the critic score has gone up. I think Hollywood and the Hollywood elites have learned of their mistake and are trying to make up for it, but too little too late. 42% is the critic score, up from, I want to say 35% or something when we started this. But they can go scratch because no one gives a shit about them. Instead, the people score, the one we care about, climbed up to 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. So that's just the conclusion of The Critics Can Go Scratch.
And I have a feeling Jack and Chris, I don't speak for any of them, but I have a feeling that they are a little bit more concerned about what the people say than what the critics are saying.
Amen, brother. Amen.
Yeah, absolutely.
As always, we need to thank our patrons, our special operator Sherry F., our special agents Daryl, Kevin, George, Matt, Dawn, Dennis, Peggy, Catherine, Ray, Bridget, Jeff, and Mark. Please subscribe, rate, and review using your favorite podcasting platform. Find us at thrillerpod.com or at Thriller Podcast. And as always, slow is smooth and smooth is fast.